All right, welcome everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into, well, let's call it the art of persuasion, shall we?
Or maybe how to spot when someone's trying to pull a fast one on you.
Exactly. And our guidebook for this journey is this fascinating little book you all sent in, How to Win Every Argument.
Yeah, it's like a dictionary of all these sneaky little tricks people use to try and, well, win arguments, even when they're not exactly playing fair.
And that's exactly what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not about becoming like an argumentation ninja or anything.
No.
But it's about recognizing those tricky tactics so we don't fall for them. And honestly, I think we can all use a little more critical thinking in our lives, right?
Absolutely. Especially in this day and age when we're bombarded with information from all sides.
So let's jump right in. The book starts off with a bang, talking about loaded words.
Right.
It's amazing how a single word can completely change how you see something.
It really is. It's like a magician's sleight of hand, but with language. The book uses the example of describing a sports match, right? One team stole a goal while the other team's efforts were well rewarded.
Same outcome, totally different feeling.
Completely.
It's like one team is sneaky and the other is deserving, but it's the same goal. This reminds me so much of like how news channels report on things. I mean, think about the last time you saw some big controversial story in the news.
Oh, yeah.
And how did different channels use certain words to kind of shape your opinion of it? It's like they're trying to bypass our logic and go straight for our gut reactions.
That's exactly what makes loaded language so effective, right? It's not about evidence or logic. It's about triggering an emotional response.
Yeah.
And we react instinctively before we even have a chance to think critically.
Sneaky, right. And speaking of sneaky, the book talks about poisoning the well, which is basically, well, it's trying to discredit someone before they even get a word in edgewise.
Right, like don't even listen to this person. They're insert insult here.
Exactly. It's like that old saying, consider the source, but weaponized.
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting about this tactic is that it shuts down the whole debate before it even begins.
Right. It's like, anything this person might say is automatically suspect because they're already tainted.
Exactly.
The book actually gives a pretty funny example. Everyone except an idiot knows X.
Right, so if you disagree, boom, you're the idiot.
Instantly. Okay, I'll admit, I've been tempted to use that one a time or two.
Oh, I think we all have. But the point is, this kind of language, it doesn't actually contribute to a productive conversation. It's really about silencing opposition, not engaging with it.
All right, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's move from manipulating language to manipulating, well, logic itself.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the gambler's fallacy?
Oh, absolutely.
It's this idea that past luck influences future odds. And let's be honest, we've all fallen for it. I'm talking lottery tickets, coin flips, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, we tend to think, well, I've lost so many times in a row, I'm due for a win. The odds have to even out eventually.
Right, like the universe is keeping score or something.
Right, exactly. But mathematically, it just doesn't work that way. Each event is independent. It's like a fresh start every time.
Right. But it's hard to shake that feeling sometimes, isn't it?
It really is.
Speaking of hard to shake, the book talks about another fascinating fallacy, the runaway train. This is where someone takes an argument to its most absurd extreme to try and make a point.
Oh, yeah, the slippery slope argument.
Exactly. Have you ever encountered this in real life? I feel like I see it all the time, especially in debates about current events.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah,
It's like they're trying to scare you into agreeing with them by showing you the worst case scenario, even if it's completely unrealistic.
Right. The book gave the example about speed limits. If lowering the speed limit saves lives, shouldn't it be 0 miles per hour? But obviously that's ridiculous. You have to balance safety with practicality.
Exactly. And that's what the runaway train fallacy ignores the need for nuance and context. It's about oversimplifying complex issues to make a point, even if it's a misleading one.
Okay, now let's talk about a tactic that feels almost like judo, using your opponent's momentum against them. The book calls it refuting the example.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
It's like someone tries to dismiss an entire argument just because they found one little flaw in a specific example.
Right, like one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. But that's not always the case.
The book used a really interesting example about a political poster that showed a happy family. And the opponents got all obsessed with whether or not those people in the photo were actually a family.
Oh, wow.
Completely missing the point about what the policy was supposed to do.
Right. It's a classic distraction tactic. Instead of engaging with the substance of the argument, they're trying to sidetrack you with irrelevant details.
It's like they're so focused on the trees, they miss the whole forest.
Exactly. And I think we all do this sometimes, right? We get so caught up in nitpicking that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. It's like we're hardwired to look for flaws, even when they don't really matter.
And that can be a real problem because it prevents us from having productive conversations and actually learning from each other.
So how do we avoid getting sidetracked by these refuted examples and stay focused on the main point? What's the key to seeing through this tactic?
Well, I think the key is to ask yourself, is this example truly representative of the whole argument? Or is it just a distraction?
Right. Is it a single bad apple? Or is the whole orchard rotten? So it's like using these fallacies, they're almost like shields, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Protecting their arguments from any real scrutiny.
Absolutely.
But you know what's even more slippery than a refuted example?
What's that?
Vague language.
Oh, yes. The book, it actually has a whole section about ambiguity, and vagueness, and how people can use these like linguistic loopholes to their advantage.
It's like those politicians, the ones who are experts at making these promises they can't be held accountable for.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'll look into it, magically transforms into, well, I never said I'd actually solved the problem. It drives me crazy.
The book, it calls this hedging. It's like they're building an escape hatch right into their argument.
Yeah.
They can backtrack or shift the meaning later on if they need to.
And then there's shifting ground, which is like a classic debate tactic.
Oh, yeah. Classic.
Every time you think you've got them pinned down on something, they pop up somewhere else.
Right, like a game of whack-a-mole.
Exactly. Changing the subject, changing the focus, anything to avoid answering the tough questions.
It's so frustrating, right? I mean, the whole point of having a debate should be to actually get closer to the truth, shouldn't it?
Exactly. But some people, they're not interested in truth. They just don't want to admit they're wrong.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Which brings us to another sneaky tactic, shifting the burden of proof.
Ooh, that's a good one.
This one really, this one makes my head spin a little bit.
It's like saying, prove to me that unicorns don't exist.
Right. Instead of giving you any evidence for their claim, they just put it all on you to disprove it.
Yeah, it's a classic way to defend, like, outlandish ideas or conspiracy theories, things that don't really have any evidence to back them up.
So it's like, I have no evidence, but you can't prove I'm wrong, so I must be right.
Exactly.
Talk about winning by default.
And it plays on our natural tendency to defend our own beliefs, right? We get so caught up in trying to prove them wrong that we forget they're the ones making the claim in the first place.
It's so clever, but it's so unfair.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to a tactic that's a bit more, aggressive.
Okay.
The straw man.
Oh, the straw man.
This is where you take someone's argument and you kind of twist it around, to make it easier to attack.
Right. You're not actually engaging with their real argument. You're building this straw man version of it that's easy to knock down.
It's like building a scarecrow and then pretending that's your real opponent.
Exactly.
The book gave the example of like refuting the theory of evolution by attacking Darwin personally.
Oh, right. Even though evolutionary theory has come a long way since then.
Exactly. It's a distraction tactic, and it's shockingly common.
Oh, yeah. Especially in political debates. You see it all the time. They'll twist their opponent's words to make them sound ridiculous.
Oh, I know. It's like they're playing a game of telephone with ideas, And by the time it gets to the end, it's completely unrecognizable.
Right. It's not even remotely what the person actually said.
Okay, speaking of misleading tactics, let's talk about the power of the crowd.
Okay, yeah.
Have you ever heard of the argument from popularity?
Oh, yes. Also known as argumentum ad populum.
Right, fancy Latin name.
Yeah.
But it's basically just the everyone's doing it, so it must be okay argument.
Sure. Exactly. But of course, just because something's popular doesn't mean it's true or even a good idea.
It reminds me of fashion trends,
Oh, yeah.
Just because everyone was wearing bell-bottoms in the 70s, it doesn't mean they were a good look.
Not at all. And this fallacy, it really plays on our desire to fit in, to be part of the group.
It's like peer pressure for ideas.
Exactly. And sometimes it can be really hard to resist that pressure, even when we know better.
But speaking of old ideas, there's kind of the flip side of this.
Okay.
The argument from tradition. Basically, it's saying that something's right because that's how it's always been done.
Yes, the good old if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality.
Right. But sometimes things are broken, even if they've been around forever.
Exactly. Tradition can be a good thing, but it shouldn't be an excuse for avoiding progress or for holding on to things that are harmful. We have to be willing to question the status quo, right?
It's like clinging to an outdated map even though you have a GPS.
Oh, a perfect analogy.
Sometimes moving forward means letting go of the old ways.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about a fallacy that I think we're all guilty of at some point.
What's that?
Wishful thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Believing something just because we want it to be true, even if there's no evidence to support it.
We've all been there. It's like saying, I'm going to win the lottery this week because I really need the money.
Right.
But sadly, our desires don't actually influence the outcome of random events.
It's like that feeling when you're waiting for an important phone call.
Oh, yeah.
And you keep checking your phone even though you know it's not going to ring.
Right. You're just willing it to happen.
Exactly. But wishful thinking, it can be harmless in some cases, right?
It can be, yeah.
But it can also lead us to make bad decisions or prevent us from facing reality. Have you ever caught yourself doing that? Making decisions based on what you hope will happen.
Oh, absolutely. It's a hard habit to break.
Okay, now for a fallacy that often traps us in a very limited way of thinking, the false dilemma.
Ah, yes, the classic either trap.
Exactly. It's like you're either with us or against us.
Right, but life is rarely that black and white.
It reminds me of those personality quizzes, the ones that try to squeeze you into one of 4 categories. And I'm always like, wait, none of these fit me. I'm more complicated than that.
Right, exactly. The false dilemma, it's all about oversimplification.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way to shut down nuanced thinking and force people to choose sides. But in reality, there's often a whole spectrum of viewpoints in between.
Okay, now for one that sounds a little technical,
okay,
the undistributed middle. And honestly, I'm not even sure I understand what that means.
It sounds intimidating, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's quite simple.
Okay.
It's a fallacy of categorization. Basically, it's when someone tries to link 2 things together just because they share a common characteristic.
Okay.
But that characteristic, it doesn't actually apply to all members of the group.
Okay, I need an example. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. Imagine someone says, all cats are mammals. All dogs are mammals. Therefore, all cats are dogs.
Okay, that's obviously wrong. But I see what you're saying. Just because they both share the characteristic of being mammals.
Right, it doesn't mean they're the same thing.
Doesn't mean they're the same thing at all.
Exactly. The middle term, mammals, it's not distributed across both categories. And you see this kind of faulty reasoning used to justify all sorts of prejudices. All terrorists are religious extremists. John is a religious extremist, therefore John is a terrorist.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty serious accusation based on some very flimsy logic.
Exactly. This is like saying all criminals are human, my neighbor is human, therefore my neighbor is a criminal. Mm-hmm. It's just not how logic works.
Right. And it's so important to recognize that this kind of sloppy thinking, it can have real-world consequences. It can lead to people being unfairly labeled or discriminated against.
Absolutely. We have to be really careful about the kinds of generalizations we make and make sure they're actually based on sound reasoning.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the power of emotions.
Okay.
The book calls this the appeal to emotion, or argumentum ad passionem.
Yes, another fancy Latin name.
But it's using emotions to manipulate people instead of relying on logic and evidence.
Right. It's about appealing to our hearts, not our heads.
Exactly. Think about those commercials for charities,
Oh, yeah.
The ones that show starving children or abused animals. They're designed to tug at your heartstrings.
Right.
And make you donate, even if you haven't actually researched the charity itself. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a powerful tactic because emotions are often more persuasive than facts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or those political ads that use fear-mongering to scare people into voting a certain way.
Okay.
They're bypassing rational thought completely.
Right. They're appealing to our most primal instincts, our fears and anxieties.
Have you ever noticed yourself getting swayed by these kinds of emotional appeals?
Oh, I think we all have. It's human nature to be moved by emotion.
Right.
But it's important to be aware of when our emotions are being manipulated, so that we can make decisions based on logic and reason, not just on how something makes us feel.
It's like our emotions are this shortcut that advertisers and politicians, they just love to exploit.
Yeah.
But even when we think we're being logical, there are still all these sneaky fallacies kind of lurking in the shadows.
Right.
The book talks about the appeal to fear, also known as, I think it's argumentum ad metum.
Yeah.
And it's all about using fear to kind of control people's choices.
Oh, yeah, classic tactic. It's like, if you don't vote for me, the economy's going to collapse. Or if we don't ban insert group here, they're going to take over.
Yeah.
It's all about creating this sense of panic.
Right.
And then presenting yourself as the only solution.
It's like those horror movies, where the scary monster, it turns out to be the only one who can save the day.
Right.
But in real life, those simple solutions, they often have like all these unintended consequences.
Oh, absolutely. Fear can make us act irrationally. We make choices that we wouldn't normally make if we were thinking clearly.
Okay, this next fallacy, it's a little tricky, I think.
Okay.
Because it seems like it should be a good thing. The appeal to authority, or argumentum ad verecundium. Isn't it okay to cite experts to support your argument?
Well, it is, but it depends on the context, right? The fallacy occurs when someone cites an authority figure who's either unqualified to speak on the topic,
right,
or their opinion is biased in some way. Like if a celebrity endorses a product, but they have no expertise in that area.
Right, like when a famous athlete tries to sell you life insurance.
Exactly. Just because they can throw a football, it doesn't mean they understand finance.
Right, exactly.
And it's important to remember, even qualified experts, they can be wrong. Just because someone has a PhD doesn't mean they're always right. We have to look at the evidence ourselves. We can't just blindly accept what authority figures tell us.
So how do we know when an expert's opinion is actually trustworthy? What are some red flags we should watch out for?
That's a great question. I think it's important to consider their credentials, their track record, whether they have any potential biases. It's also important to look for evidence that actually supports their claims. Don't just take their word for it.
So it's about being like an informed consumer of information, not just a passive recipient. Okay, let's dive into another fallacy that I think we've all encountered at some point.
Yeah.
The ad hominem attack.
Oh yes, the ad hominem.
It's when someone attacks the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument itself.
Right. So instead of engaging with the ideas, they attack the person's character, their background, their appearance. It's like saying, your argument is wrong because you have bad hair.
Right. It's so childish. It's like they can't win on the merits of their own argument, so they just resort to personal insults.
Right, exactly.
But what's even more frustrating? The appeal to ignorance, or argumentum ad ignorantium, it's basically saying, no one has proven me wrong, so I must be right.
Ah, yes, a classic. It plays on our natural curiosity, our desire to believe in things that are unexplained. But just because something hasn't been proven false, it doesn't automatically mean it's true.
It's like saying, no one has proven that unicorns don't exist, so they must be real.
Exactly. But the burden of proof should be on the person making the claim.
Right.
Not on everyone else to disprove it.
And this fallacy, it's often used to support like extraordinary claims.
Yeah.
Things like paranormal phenomena or conspiracy theories.
Oh, absolutely. When there's no real evidence, the appeal to ignorance can be a very tempting tactic.
Speaking of extraordinary claims, let's talk about the post hoc fallacy, or post hoc ergo propter hoc, which basically means after this, therefore because of this.
Right. It's about assuming that just because two events happen in sequence, the first one must have caused the second one. But correlation doesn't equal causation.
It's like that old superstition, if a black cat crosses your path, you'll have bad luck. But obviously the cat didn't cause the bad luck, it's just a coincidence.
Exactly, and you see this fallacy a lot in pseudoscience, alternative medicine. People will say, oh, I started taking this herbal supplement and my symptoms went away, so the supplement must be working.
Right.
But it could just be the placebo effect.
Right.
Or just the natural course of the illness.
So we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions just because things happen in a certain order.
Exactly. It's about being critical thinkers, looking for real evidence, not just anecdotal stories.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today, from loaded language to emotional appeals to faulty logic. It's amazing how many ways there are to manipulate an argument.
It is fascinating, isn't it? But remember, the goal of learning about these fallacies isn't to become a master manipulator yourself.
Right.
It's about becoming a more discerning listener, a more critical thinker.
It's about recognizing these tactics in ourselves and in others.
Absolutely.
So we can have more honest, more productive conversations.
Exactly. It's about striving for clear thinking, for civil discourse, even when we disagree.
So this deep dive, it wasn't just about winning arguments, it was about becoming better thinkers, better communicators. And that's a journey I think we can all take together.